Oh man, it's so good to be here. Finally, a holiday. Because of COVID, I was not traveling for 2 years. And now in Granada, far away from university, no administrative paperwork to fill out, no teaching, no reviews, no students. No students. So good. My life cannot be better. The fuck? No way I'm gonna answer that.
Dear caller, you have reached Balázs voicemail, who is currently attending the Financial Cryptography and Data Security Conference. Please leave a message after the beep.
Hey, it's Pishti. Are you still there? Do you have a few minutes? I would like to talk with you. I need your help.
Hey Pishti, are you still there?
Balázs, hey, finally. I'm so glad that I've reached you. I'm in Kiev in the Zoloty Vorota underground metro station, and I really need some of your suggestions. You know that I have no clue whatsoever about these privacy enhancing technologies, and but I really need to use them. You know, I need not only a secure but also a private way to communicate with my sources and also with my news agency. Honestly, I really don't know much about anonymous communication, but I surely know that I should not use Facebook Messenger, right?
Hell no. There, your messages are not even encrypted, and Facebook will see all your personal data and messages in clear. Moreover, they will be glad to sell it to other companies to make some juicy profits.
I see. And what's your opinion about messaging apps using end to end encryption? In that case, the servers cannot infer anything about the content of my messages, I guess. I should only use instant messaging applications with end to end encryption enabled, right?
For sure, you could choose, for example, Telegram or Signal, but there are many other apps as well providing end to end encryption. These apps are definitely a big step toward preserving your privacy. They are end to end encrypted, hence, not even the server or other eavesdroppers can see the content of your communication. However, it does have some few drawbacks. For instance, these apps are not metadata resistant.
And what does metadata resistance mean in this context?
Even though the messages remain confidential, the server still see quite a lot of information. For instance, who is communicating with whom, when, and they might even have access to location data, namely where the participants communicate. This type of information are called the metadata of the communication.
Is it really a privacy problem?
You tell me, the former president of the NSA, Michael Hayden, once said that they were killing people based on metadata. Metadata is a super rich source of information. Imagine that you receive a message from a soldier from the front line and then you immediately contact your news agency. Then, anyone eavesdropping on your communication can know that you received an important piece of information that you promptly forwarded for publication.
Damn it! So definitely confidentiality of the messages are not enough for me, and end-to-end encryption is the bare minimum I should require from an instant messaging app.
That sounds like a good approach.
You know, for me, the anonymity of my recipients is quite important. I also need to protect the privacy of my recipients, who are oftentimes my secret sources. Most of the time, they are civilians, but sometimes they are soldiers or secret agents.
This is called recipient anonymity. Well known end to end messaging apps do not provide this anonymity guarantee. On the other hand, a recent technology called fuzzy message detection provides enhanced recipient anonymity which might be an interest to you. It was presented in a major academic venue called CCS last year.
Oh wow, this sounds interesting. I'm all ears. How does this fuzzy message detection work? Can you explain it to me in a nutshell?
Gladly. Imagine that people send all their messages to an instant messaging application server. Once the recipient of the messages are online, they will download the messages from the server that were sent to them. Moreover, they also request and download the messages that are not sent to them, which they cannot even decrypt. Let's call these messages false positives. The nice thing is that these false positives will fool the server in figuring out which messages are the real ones.
But why? Cannot the server know which message is the genuine one and which is the cover traffic?
That's the magic of cryptography. Luckily, the server cannot distinguish between a true positive and a false positive message downloaded by a recipient.
And how many false positive messages a user needs to download from the server to fool the server sufficiently?
That's a very good question. Actually, I asked this from myself recently. In the FMD scheme, there is a user defined parameter called false positive detection rate. Each user can define their own false positive rates. These will determine the expected number of false positive messages the client will download. For instance, a false positive rate of one third means that every message that is not sent to the client will be downloaded with probability one third. Naturally, the larger your false positive rate is, the more messages you are going to download, which provides you with more privacy. So there is an inherent trade off between efficiency and privacy here.
Makes sense. Besides this recipient anonymity, I also don't want to let the server know if two of my messages are sent to the same recipient. And with regards to any recipient, the server should not know if they received the message in any time interval.
These properties are called recipient unlinkability and temporal detection ambiguity. Sadly, just as in the case of recipient anonymity, FMD does not guarantee this with certainty.
So, what kind of privacy and anonymity guarantees does it provide? I don't want anyone to know with whom I'm communicating. Otherwise, both of us will be really soon dead.
Well, it depends. Okay, so let's go one by one. So, relationship anonymity guarantees that no third party can deduce whether two users are communicating. In FMD, the recipient might download a message from the sender even if they are not communicating, because the recipient downloads any message of the sender with probability p. On the other hand, if these two users exchange a handful of messages, it is already starting to be obvious that the recipients downloaded the message from the sender not because of pure chance but on purpose. Put differently, among those downloaded messages, there should be a true positive message. If there were no real message between the sender and the recipient, then the number of downloaded messages would follow roughly a Gaussian normal distribution. But if there are also true positive messages, then it will be the case that the recipient simply downloads too many messages that are unlikely that could come from a Gaussian distribution. This type of hypothesis, whether two users are communicating or not in FMD, can be tested with a standard statistical test.
Can you give me, please, an example scenario where the statistical tests show that such a communication relationship exists?
For instance, imagine that you send 100 message overall and your recipient false positive rate is 1 over 8. Then you can send to this recipient a maximum of 9 messages that still do not break your relationship anonymity using the statistical test with significance level 1%.
Okay, so my recipients should have a large false positive rate, and I should also send many messages to other people.
Yeah, that sounds like a good approach.
Thanks. Now I got it. And what about the other privacy requirements you mentioned?
Well, concerning recipient unlinkability, we want that the server should not be able to tell whether two messages are sent to the same user or not. There is a simple attack against this. So imagine that there is no one in the intersection of the users who downloaded those messages. Then, surely, these messages were sent to different people. On the other hand, if there is even a single person in the intersection, then the server could guess that those messages were intended for the same user. It turns out that this simple attack is already quite powerful. This implies that if you want to achieve recipient unlinkability, then you should have large false positive rates and many honest users in the system.
Hmm. So large false positive rates do seem to be a must for this scheme. And how about the third thing you mentioned, temporal DBDB whatever?
You mean a temporal detection ambiguity. So whether you can hide the fact that in a certain time interval you received a real message. That's also problematic a bit. As usual, you should have high false positive rates and many messages in the system.
So there's just no way around a high false positive detection rate, does it?
Unfortunately, no. And game theory incentives are actually suggesting that selfish users could set it low, as downloading other people's messages does provide, for instance, recipient anonymity for them, but not for the selfish user directly.
This doesn't sound that great. And how about the protection of the number of incoming messages? Can fuzzy message detection conceal this information from the prying eyes of the server?
I'm afraid I don't have great news. This property is protected by a nice and standard privacy guarantee called differential privacy, which is neat. The main idea is that the server does not see the exact number of incoming messages because the server sees only the true and false positive messages together. So the server only see a noisy version of this statistic. You can think of a number of downloaded cover messages as a random Gaussian noise added to the number of real messages in order to hide the number of incoming messages. My calculations show that FMD achieves only a quite brittle notion of differential privacy.
And does fuzzy message detection provide this differential privacy for the messages as well, and not just for the number of incoming messages? So could it hide the existence of a message?
Differential privacy requires a symmetric noise. So without something like a false negative detection rate, it cannot guarantee that. However, it does satisfy a relaxed version of it, called personalized existing edge differential privacy.
So if the privacy guarantees of this fuzzy message detection are rather weak, then why are you suggesting it to me?
I would not call it weak per se. Actually, this is the most efficient and practical cryptographic scheme we have so far for enhancing recipient anonymity in an instant messaging applications. And some of the best cryptographers are working on similar problems. I merely raised some points to choose your detection rates carefully.
Okay, I see. So can I use it right now? You only mentioned the scientific paper and not an actual application. Is this used by anyone or implemented and deployed in real life?
Well, many teams and projects are planning to incorporate FMD into their solution to enhance the privacy of their users. As far as I know, currently there is no live system that uses FMD.
So all of these statistical issues you raised are only theoretical?
Not at all. I made some simulations and it seems that the privacy attacks I mentioned before works also on realistic communication networks. I took two publicly available real-world communication networks where the nodes are the users and the edges are the exchanged messages. Additionally, edges also contain timestamps, so we do know how these graphs evolved through time. For every recipient, I randomly selected a false positive rate and generated the cover traffic for all the messages with respect to the recipient false positive rates. I launched the statistical tests on these communication graphs to see how effective they are. And I must admit, they are pretty effective. For instance, the server can break relationship anonymity with 20% precision and 40% recall. Statistical tests produce higher recall for nodes with lower false positive rates, and they are less effective for communicating pairs that exchange very few messages.
So it seems that fuzzy message detection might not provide enough privacy in realistic scenarios unless users apply large false positive detection rates. Makes sense. Well, thanks a lot. You have given me plenty to think about. And final question: what would be the consequence if fuzzy message detection